the vibraphone together with the chimes. This is considered for him in this piece to be a keyboard instrument and associated with the en martineau, the celeste, and so on. It was a jazz instrument, of course. That's what it was known as. It was imported from the USA, but he doesn't use it in a jazz way. He uses the idea of a motor which opens and closes the resonators to give a vibrating effect in some of the slow melodies. Here's the sort of thing I mean. That vibrating effect. It seems to me that a lot of the writing, not only for the vibraphone and for the rest of the percussion, has this rather hypnotic, repetitious effect, as if he's trying to create some other kind of sound, some other culture. There's a passage around about figure 12 that he gives the vibraphone along with the other keyboard instruments. So the same pattern repeated several times across the beat, across the bar, as if there is no particular pulse, just repeated sounds. It's not just in repeated rhythmic patterns that Messiaen uses the vibraphone. He also uses it in a very slow sostenuto manner, when you can really hear the sound vibrating. You can hear the opening and closing of the fans quite quickly, actually. It's part of the problem of listening now, the beginning of the 20th century. This is all new. It must have been astonishing. It almost had a pungency about it, this kind of music. And trying to really recreate in ourselves the kind of effects that it had on an audience then, and it's extraordinary, quite extraordinary. Well, the Tamtam is part of the official percussion collection in Turangalîla. He's very specific about note length. This happens quite a lot during the whole piece. It's crucial to the way his percussion melodies work out. So you can see it in some of his writing. Actually gives numbers of semiquavers long a note is. And there are parts where the Tamtam has to be damped. He doesn't say that, but it is clear from the score that it should only last a bar and then stop. So rather than just letting something ring on, as one might expect, he's quite specific, Messiaen, and he wants it damped. Perhaps more conventionally, although nonetheless, I think quite unusual for the time, is this idea of using percussion in a massive crescendo, and the Tamtam is particularly good at this. There are one or two passages where both the Tamtam and the bass drum have this almighty crescendo, which stops suddenly, and it is quite devastating. So there are a lot of high frequencies with the Tamtam, which you can hear very clearly in that very loud crescendo. But there are a lot of low frequencies as well. And he often uses the Tamtam to support the low instruments like the bassoon, the cello, the bass. It's particularly noticeable in a later work, Et Expecto Resurrectione Mortorum, quite a few years later actually, where he uses the Tamtam and its deep sonority, some great profound sound that he uses to underpin the orchestral texture. It's an extraordinary instrument. It fascinates me how cymbals could ever be considered as part of any kind of musical ensemble, because they have no pitch, they have no harmony, they have no melody, they seldom have rhythm, they're usually just a single note. Nevertheless, it seems that composers, when everything else is complete, they have to have cymbals as well. And for this performance we're doing at Esa-Pekka, I'll be using quite a small suspended cymbal. There's been a fashion over the last few decades to use quite large suspended cymbals for the big effects in Mahler and so on. But he asks not only for what he calls cymbals suspendus, but he also asks for a small Turkish cymbal. And it's difficult to know exactly what he meant, but I think, that it's a small, quite heavy instrument sounding rather more like this. In a sense, with a Turkish cymbal, there's less of a splash and more of a note. It's more of a ringing sound. He uses a third suspended cymbal, this time a Chinese cymbal, which is a quite different sound again. The difference in the shape is certainly crucial. It has a dome in the normal way, but it has a curved edge like this, and this rather curious little thing at the top here. I suspect also it's to do with the way the profile of the cymbal is shaped from the center, which is quite thick, to the middle, which is possibly even thicker, and then a hammered section, and then quite thin at the edge. Part of the effect is in the different pitches that the different cymbals give, but also the different timbre that they give. He achieves the balance and the differentiation between the cymbals by giving them, like the tam-tam, very specific lengths. So one sound isn't ringing above another sound, which isn't ringing above another sound. So simply what I've done there, as a new cymbal is played, I've immediately damped the previous one, and as I played the last one, I immediately damped the second one. So they take over from each other in close proximity to give a kind of edited sound. There's a real sense of pitch and duration also. This is very similar to the effect you have in gamelan players, for example, where one note is played and immediately the previous one is damped. Where that's done with one player, we'll be using several players, which has its own problems because of coordination and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, it seems to be a similar effect, but there are very specific layers of sound and pitch in his percussion writing. It's very clear from the score. So in addition to the suspended cymbals, the Turkish, the Chinese, the conventionally suspended cymbal, there's an even more conventional pair of cymbals, cymbal frappe, he calls them, struck together. In some places in the score, in the part, they're called choqué, choked. I believe this is more to do with the kind of effect he wants, again, a sudden stopping of the sound. So that's much more of the conventional sound that one might be used to in a Tchaikovsky symphony, for example, where there's almost an indeterminate length. It's to do with the effect of cymbals themselves. And again, we'll be using rather smaller cymbals for Esa-Pekka's performances than the kind of larger instruments which have developed over the last few decades, simply to recreate that kind of more kind of miniature sound of percussion rather than the overblown sound that it's become. In the middle of the ensemble, there's some quite small instruments. There's a wood block, there's tambourine, triangle, maracas, temple blocks. Each one has got a very specific sound. It sounds like no other instrument. The wood block, it relatively would be unknown. Again, it's an Oriental instrument. It's the sort of sound that people might have heard in a Shinto temple. What's interesting in Messiaen's writing is how he gives duration to these notes. A wood block has just got a single note. It's gone in a flash. So the sound is gone in a split second. But he notates the wood block, as he does with the snare drum, the casse-claire, with quite long notations, dotted minims, quite long durations. Actually, it makes it easier to read. One of the occasions when the woodblock features, in a sense, so it's not the only instrument playing, there are many other instruments as well, but one of the occasions when it features is in a duet with the snare drum, with the casse-claire. They have identical rhythms. Played like that, it sounds a bit random and seems to have no pulse, no meter. When everything else is playing, the rest of the ensemble has strict semiquavers, da 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 da, and it makes complete sense.